Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with me, Pereira. And after a brief hiatus, it's good to be back doing the program once again. I was busy over the last couple of months mentoring students for the UPSC personality test, and the results are out today. Over 600 students have cleared the exams, and it's good to have mentored many of them who have actually cleared those examinations as well. Now it's back to big picture and to talk about India's exports ban. We've seen, India bring about a ban on wheat and sugar as well. What kind of an impact is it going to have on globalization? What kind of an impact is it going to have on global trade? Because the G7 countries, several countries in the Middle East as well, are skeptical about this particular ban because they're worried that there could be a rice ban to follow. The government, of course, has said that we might not do it, and in all probability, there will not be a rice ban. But who's to say? Anything can happen in the weeks and months to come. To talk about this, I have distinguished guests with me on the program: Dr. Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, and Mr. Jayant Dasgupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Mr. Dua, let me start the program with you first. How would you look at this ban, that has been carried out on the exports of wheat and sugar, and what does all of this mean? Put it into perspective for us.
I think a strong and as far as wheat is concerned, we were never really an exporter of wheat, as we all know. We started exporting in 2016 with hardly 0.07 million tons. Was the first year. And last year, particularly because after the Ukraine war, we stepped up our exports in the months of February and March, and we got close to 7 million tons. For the current year, we set ourselves a goal of 10 million tons because we were expecting a very good harvest of 111 million tons of wheat to be grown in different parts of the country during the Rabi season. Unfortunately, because of hot summer in the late March and almost the whole of April, there was an effect of this global heat, global climate change on the productivity of wheat, which is now expected to fall by 8 million tons to 103 million, lower than last year's 105 or 6. The question is, it's not that we're going to consume all this 103 million tons, 3 or 5, because we do have a buffer stock of the previous years, close to 29 million tons with the FCI, 29 or 30 million tons. The question is, with what we are experiencing around the world, that two major exporters of wheat and exporters that order in terms of cost in production and wood. Russia first. Both of them their wheat is not going to be available in large quantum for the global market. In the case of Ukrainian, for the obvious reasons that it has not been it wasn't sown in the quantity it should have been.
Okay. There's a storm in Delhi, and that storm certainly seems to be affecting, the internet and technical lines. I think Mr. Dua has got a technical problem with the internet connection. Now I'll come back to you, Mr. Dua, in just a bit, but let me bring in Mr. Dasgupta into the picture. I think it's stabilized now. You can go ahead. Please make the point that you're making. We're talking about Ukraine.
I'll be quick. In the case of Russia, it is not production loss. It is a deliberate policy decision of the Russian government saying if the West can sanction us, financial sanctions be imposed upon us, we can also retaliate in terms of food sanctions upon the Western world and consequently the other consumers. That's what we are experiencing when we say there has been an escalation of the wheat prices. It's not because out of the 10 million ton which India was supposed to send, about 2 million ton had gone, another million odd, the letters of credit have been issued or have been opened. So that's underway. About 3 million ton in any case out of the 10 was going. The other 7 would have gone gradually over the next 5 or 6 weeks. But it is the Russian wheat which is being held back.
And that is what is causing a problem really as far as the global market is concerned. Talking about the global market, Mr. Dasgupta. Mr. Dasgupta, let me come across to you now. As far as the situation in the global market is concerned, how big a concern is the lack of availability of wheat? Because wheat is a staple across many countries around the world. So what does this really mean?
The size of the global market in wheat is approximately about 200 million tons. And the size of rice is much smaller. It's about 50 million tons only. Now, as far as the exporters, major exporters are concerned, the Russians account for about 18% of global exports. The Canadians and the US account for 13% each. And the Ukrainians another 9 odd percent. So between the Russians and the Ukrainians, they account for about 27% of global exports of wheat. So you can take it as about 54 million tons out of 200 million tons. Now, India, at best, if you look at India's exports since 2016 or so, India was at the 19th position, 36th position, 25th position, and so on. Only in the financial year 21-22, it has improved to 7.5 million tons out of approximately 200 million tons of global trade. But India is not a major wheat exporter. India, in fact, in years, certain years, 2006-7 comes to mind quickly. That was a year when India had imposed a wheat export ban and had imported a lot of wheat from Australia, from Ukraine, etc. So overall, if you look at it, in the past 2-3 years, last year the production was about 109 million tons of wheat, and we procured about 43 million tons. This year, though we projected in the first estimate about 111 million tons, it has now been revised in the third estimate, I think, which came out on the 21st of May or thereabouts. It has been revised to about 102, 103 million tons, as Dr. Dua was mentioning. The other problem is about 9 million tons has been the shortfall in terms of the loss of production, and mainly on account of excessive heat. The second point is that because the Ukrainians stopped exporting from the last week of February, and the Russians stopped exporting also from, I think, March onwards, there has been a shortage of wheat in the global market, which would be available during these months, March, April, May. And the next big consignment of wheat is to come in June from Argentina and Australia. So India was wanting to use this window to export about 10 million tons. And we have contracted for about 4 million tons, for which LCs had been opened, and about 3 million of those 4 million have already gone. Now, the issue is that we also export a lot of the wheat traditionally to Bangladesh. Now, because of the problem in Sri Lanka, we have given a lot of food aid to Sri Lanka, or exports to Sri Lanka. We have sent consignments to Afghanistan. We have sold wheat to Egypt, to Turkey. So there are many countries which have benefited from wheat exports from India. As far as the ban is concerned, the problem was that because of the rising prices in the international market, farmers uh, gave their produce to not at the MSP to government procuring agencies, but private traders stepped in and they started buying it at a slightly higher rate than the MSP. Now, I must mention one point that the entire rise in prices in the international market does not get passed on substantially to the farmers. It only gets passed on in a very small measure to the farmers. The traders who have the staying capacity and the deep pockets, they make most of the profits. So they took a position. They started procuring wheat because they could foresee that the Ukrainians would not be in a position to export anything. The Russians may or may not. And as Dr. Dua mentioned, the Russians indeed have not been exporting wheat at all, or maybe in very small quantities. So the traders then took up positions and they bought wheat and they started exporting. So the procurement came down from 43 million tons. By most of the procurement in India gets over by about the 15th of June. From the trends that we could see this year, our procurement would remain below 20 million tons. Against 43 last year, it would be 20 million tons. So that is the main problem why we have not been able to allow free export of wheat. And we had to impose a ban around the 12th of May.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mr. Dua, coming back to you now, let's hope that the internet connectivity holds up because of the storm in Delhi. But, as far as the newspapers and the wheat ban is concerned, even the sugar ban, a lot of it has been attributed to inflation back home. Is that a spin that is being given, or is that truly the fact?
I think the truth is somewhere in between. We've had a bumper crop of sugar cane. The farmers saw that the consumption or the local demand isn't enough to match the supply. So it was this time driven by the farmers, the rich sugar farmers. I'm using the rich because there is a lobby amongst them who is able to call the shots as far as the sugar policy of the country is concerned, saying, please advance the conversion or hasten the conversion of, sugarcane-based molasses, or sugar juice-based molasses from molasses to ethanol. And we were able to this year suddenly reach a 10% of our total demand of petrol and diesel sold coming from being met by ethanol. Largely sugarcane, our biofuels in somewhat less quantity, but rising. This year, the government had set for itself a target of reaching 20% by 2030. That has now been advanced, courtesy of the sugar farmers, to 2025. So here was a market, and the government has stepped up the assured rate of purchasing ethanol. So that's going to be a subsidy to the oil marketing companies, easier to administer. They buy it, they pay the ethanol producer an assured rate and charge the government for the difference or the extra burden upon them. That's a mechanism all the OMCs are quite used to. In addition, the government had kept the export window open, saying they can also export sugar, and the sugar exports of a significant order had begun. Suddenly, the government finding that if the food inflation in the country is now crossed 8%, that it could be a problem. Wheat, sugar, edible oils, not really under the government control because more than 50% of it is imported. So the government has now started talking about fixing the limit on what can be the exports, or the quantum of export allowed. And that is being fixed at, or has been fixed in the last couple of days at 10 million tons in all during the financial year, which has just begun. So the government has said, yes, we are supporting so that the farmers continue to get a good remunerated price. It doesn't fall. So a window is open, but limited to 10 million tons. You explore the ethanol window, for which we have stepped up the prices, and at the same time wait between ethanol and the open market price for sugar.
Absolutely. Mr. Dasgupta, coming back to you now, all of this has caught the attention of the global market as well. Countries around the world seem to be weighing in too. And, questions are being asked about globalization. Your thoughts?
Well, globalization is always subject to the conditions which are prevalent in the domestic market of countries. So no country in the world is ever going to allow exports freely if its own citizens are unable to afford the high prices of anything which is considered an essential commodity. And food is indeed one of them. So in 1947, when the GATT was being framed, Article 11.2 of the GATT very clearly says that there could be export restrictions or import restrictions also put, especially for tackling critical food shortages. So export restrictions are something which have been there for many countries. Our Commerce Minister was recently quoted as saying that there are 22 European countries which restrict the exports of various kinds of food products at different times. They have the legal framework for them to do this. India has, of course, as we mentioned, India has not been a strong exporter of wheat. It has been mostly absent from the scene for till about 2016. And after that, it started in a small way. Now that there is a shortage in the international market, there is a trend of rising prices, but of course it will get tempered to a certain extent when the Argentinian and the Australian wheat comes in. And after that, the US wheat will also come into the market. So there would be a cooling down effect. So, and India, mind it, out of 200 million tons, 7.5 million tons is what we exported last year. This year, it is already going to be about 4 million tons. And not including the government-to-government sales that we make to Bangladesh, to Sri Lanka, Afghanistan, and many other countries of Africa and Northern Africa. So I don't think really this G7 criticism, which was aired sometime in the third week of May in Germany, that is justified, or that is something which we should be paying too much heed to.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen, time to get closing comments to the best way forward and what next, starting first with you, Mr. Dua.
I think food security, domestic food security must continue to receive the precedence over global exports, globalization, because as Jayant very rightly mentioned, drew attention to the GATT agreement, when the electoral clause article or clause 11.2, which gives each country the right to do so. And we are only emulating what the West has always done, including right now 22 countries of Europe themselves. Or how many are there? 28 of them in the European Union?
27 now, sir.
Yeah,
27.
now 27. If they continue to look after their interests, why shouldn't we? So that's number one. Number two, I think the Germans have recanted, because only yesterday the German the ambassador in India said it's Russia to blame, not India, very categorically. And I think he drew inspiration from a statement by President Putin day before, who linked withdrawal of sanctions, economic, financial sanctions upon Russia with food security of the world. Which he was saying, you do that, I'll release the food which should rightly go into the open market. So India is, I think, exonerated to a fair extent when the guilty is admitting, the accuser is admitting the position vis-a-vis us, and we can, I think, continue to be selective in imposing such bans, restrictions, looking at our interests the foremost.
Absolutely. And Mr. Dasgupta, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Yeah, the government has buffer norms for both rice and wheat, and the overall operational stock plus strategic reserves. How much should we be having? So on the 1st of April, we should have about 21 million tons. 1st of July, 41 million tons. 1st of October, 30 million tons. 1st of January, another 21 million tons. Now, if we fall short of this, there would be problems and there would be price rise, and the poorest will, of course, get hit very badly. So we try to obviate this problem, and our buffer norms and operational stock norms are basically meant to provide to the targeted PDS and to the OWS, other welfare scheme beneficiaries. So we are well justified in doing what we are doing. The other point I wanted to mention, two more points. One point is that because of our very scientific stocking norms, we could tide over the crisis of COVID, wherein we were able to provide the full supply of cereals, at least, to the below poverty line people, especially the migrant labor who were left without any means of livelihood incomes. So,
Jayant, if I might just button to say, not just to the migrant labor and the poor people, 800 million people in India.
Yes.
2/3 of the country's population was supplied 5 kilograms
yes,
per month all through the COVID. 800 million people.
yes,
larger than the population of Europe, whole of Europe.
That's right. So that is the second point. The last point I wanted to mention is that we must have better predictability about how much is going to be the crop, so that whatever export restrictions we put are put way in advance, not at the last moment by way of a knee-jerk reaction, because this has partly got to do with the scientific setup that we have. We have, for instance, the temperatures in March were very high. If we had, we could have studied the impact on the production, we could perhaps have imposed this restriction much earlier and not led to these hiccups.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. And well, what's coming out of this discussion is the fact that this particular decision of the government has come at a time when the world is looking internally and looking at putting themselves first. We've seen globalization taking a hit over the last 5 years or so. Let's not forget, for every country in the world, domestic food security is of utmost importance, and its own people always come first. And hence, India too is following that path. As far as wheat ban is concerned, we only started exporting wheat about 5 years ago. So India is not really a major player. And, nations around the world should stop blaming India for this so-called shortage of wheat, but look within, especially the European Union should look closer at what's happening closer to their own, boundaries and borders with Russia and the Ukraine. As far as the way forward is concerned, we will certainly try and play a leading role like we've done with many things over the last 5 years or so in trying to be global leaders, and we will try to get that in order. But we have to keep our house in order first if we can do something for the world. Let's hope that that happens sooner rather than later. Now, before I go, let me just remind you to like the video, subscribe, and share the content as well, so that more people get to know about Bharata First. Also, I was mentioning the UPSC personality tests and UPSC results are out. Several of the people who have cracked UPSC this year, over 100 people have been closely mentored by me, and thanks to the kind of support that we've seen from the team as well, we've seen several of them get through the UPSC CSC. You could be one of those too. All you need to do is log on to kc.bharatafirst.com or download the Bharata First app, log into the Knowledge Center and register now. Thanks to the support of a few good people, I've always maintained and mentioned that this is going to be more of an effort to help each and every one of you. So some of the courses that are available at the Knowledge Center are less than 150 rupees a course. Log on to kc.bharatafirst.com right now. Have a look at all the details. Prices have been slashed by over 90%. This is being done only to help you. Don't forget once again to like, subscribe, and share. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.